I don't need to go out to Los Angeles and become a film composer anymore. My dream is not that specific. I don't even have to compose my own original music. I love orchestrating and arranging other people's music. But I need to be creating or helping others with their creation. I need to be using my compositional skills. Hello and welcome to the Musician Toolkit, episode number 79. My name is David Lane and it is great to be with you once again. I hope all of you are doing well today. It is almost officially summer. As I've said before, I hope everyone has a great time this summer. If summer is something that is a different season for you, where you're not working just like you always do. But I hope that you're able to take time, enjoy being outside, don't get too hot, but also, even if you have some downtime, like if you're a student, stay productive, stay in a mindset of growth so that when you go back to school in the fall, you're actually better as a musician than you were when you left in the spring. Because most people don't do that. I think I represented most people. There were very few summers that I took the time to do that. It really wasn't until I got to college that I saw like this was an opportunity that I could compose a lot of music. In fact, most of the music for my senior composition recital was composed during one particular summer. So take advantage of those opportunities. Okay, I want to talk about, first of all, a little peek into how I organize kind of podcast episodes in terms of like what's going to be episode number 80, 81, 82, 83. So for the most part, I have a list of guests that I want to record. Sometimes I've already recorded some guests. I have 2 guests that I've already recorded. And I generally at any point could tell you what I think the next 4 or 5 episodes will be. And I certainly can always tell you what the next episode's going to be. So I'm not going to give anything away, but I know what episode 80 is going to be. And 24 hours ago, I knew what episode 79, this episode, was going to be. I knew it was going to be a solo episode. I knew exactly what I was going to talk about. But when I woke up this morning, I couldn't stop thinking about something that has kind of, to use a musical term, it has crescendoed in my mind this week. It started off pianissimo, and it's just grown into a fortissimo. And so I knew that I need to put off what I was going to talk about for a future episode and talk about this today, because this is on my heart, this is on my mind. It's also going to be a little bit more autobiographical, a little bit more personal. But that's another thing about this podcast that I've mentioned before. I don't think I've really emphasized it enough. The things I talk about on this podcast, particularly when it comes to mindset, when it comes to goals, when it comes to strategies, yes, I hope that some of you listening will find that encouraging. I really hope it helps you in all that you're trying to accomplish. But I'm also trying to encourage myself because I, like probably all of you, am a work in progress. And I haven't met too many people. Correction, I haven't met any people who you would consider successful that think that they've arrived, that aren't always trying to find ways to make themselves better and to find that formula of what will make them successful in terms of what will make them monetarily successful, what will make them successful in terms of happiness and just fulfillment. So my past, I guess, 6 years, 7 years, has been a very interesting adventure. If you were to ask me what it was that I really wanted to do with my life, probably on any of those years, the answer would be at least slightly different, and in some cases radically different. So in 2017, I worked in New York, and I had a comment given to me. It was actually a report of a comment. It wasn't said to me directly. It was said to the people I was collaborating with. It was given to me by an equity actor and someone that I've made friends with. Not because of this comment, but just because I got to hang out with him later. But this was my first time leading rehearsals, music rehearsals in New York. And the comment that was given to the writers that I was working with, the people who brought me up there by this actor, they were just asking what kind of other things I had done around the city. And when they said that I don't live in New York, I live in North Carolina, that surprised him because the way that I handled myself and the quality of the arrangements that I did, he assumed I must be pretty successful in the New York theater scene. And I let that go way to my head, to the point to where I came back from that trip and immediately decided that I wanted to give myself a 9-month goal of how to move to New York. And I did a bit of work. I looked into options of like where I would get an apartment and just how that might work. Also with me being married and, we had an idea that I would go up there and, just kind of live separately for a while and see how things work. And honestly, I can't tell you what caused me to pivot from that, other than probably New Yorkers themselves. It was probably, and I don't mean that the way it sounded. I mean, I have a lot of friends that live in New York, and my Facebook feed, it's, as I was thinking about it, I kept seeing people say how much they're just burnt out by the city and can't wait to move. There's actually a book, it's very hard to read, that gets into this, and it's called The Death of the Artist. And I'll probably butcher the pronunciation, but it's by William Deresiewicz. If he listens to this, I apologize for most likely butchering his name. But it talked about the necessity to be in certain markets if you want to achieve certain things. Like, I know this, as a film composer, your odds of making it past a certain point are really low if you don't live in Los Angeles or London or maybe a handful of other cities around the world. Your odds of making it high up in musical theater are much lower if you don't have a residence in New York or London or a handful of other places around the world. But you also get gobs of people every year with similar aspirations moving to these places, and most of them burn out. So the people who are successful are the ones who move to these places and don't burn out. Okay, so this is a bit of a tangent. I'm not talking today about why you should move to a certain place if you want to achieve a certain thing. That is certainly a conversation that's worth having in the future. I'm not really prepared to go all in on that right now, so let's put that aside for some other time. I just wanted to tell you where my head was in 2017 and where it kind of led into 2018. At some point by 2018, I was moving on with other things. But going into 2019, I was really sure that I needed to put myself in a position that I could actually get higher level jobs of the types that I was doing. So get larger, more prestigious church music directing job, to get bigger music directing credits in theater, but also to be able to teach on a collegiate level. So I have, and at the same time I had, a master's degree, but I never went to school for my doctorate. So I went to a local university with a very good music program, very good graduate music program. They have several types of doctoral degrees that you can study for. And I met with 2 members of the faculty who very gently but very persuasively convinced me not to apply. Now, I could have taken that as don't apply here, you're not likely to be accepted. And they went through the numbers, they went through the types of students they were looking for. You're either of a certain age, you have a certain proximity to your last degree, or you've had a certain type of professional experience. And I was 0 for 3 on all of those categories. Now, to be encouraging, they said you don't need a doctorate for what you want to do. You just need to expand your network. And if not live in cities like LA or New York, go visit them more, go make some connections, go out to lunch with people, try to get work outside of your local market. And so that was kind of the path that I thought I would be heading on as we got into 2020. I even went to the my first SCTC, which is a Southeastern Theater Conference, went there in Louisville in 2020, and I felt like I was right on path. I was doing these things. And then we know what happened in March 2020. Everybody was stuck home. There's no such thing as in-person networking. And yet in 2020, people were making films on low budgets and, they needed composers. So in 2020, I scored 4 films, including my first feature film in like 20 years. And guess what? Reset. New passion. I was bringing back my childhood desire, not really childhood, but my adolescent desire to be a film composer again. So I started thinking about how I could frequently go to LA and how I could even transition to online-only lessons. It's kind of a main way. Actually, that idea of getting online-only actually happened before the pandemic started. But it really kind of escalated during that time of just kind of thinking about how I can, my passion is all in. I can go back in on this. As I sit here and just kind of recollect, I don't remember what caused that to fade and then eventually go another direction. I think part of it had to do with I kind of skipped a big chapter. I started my first podcast in 2020 after the pandemic had started. So, and that podcast was about musical theater. It wasn't about film scoring. I also had a very impactful, some might even argue, traumatizing experience. Because even this year, I've wrestled with my feelings of it. And this happened toward the end of 2021 in musical theater. And that affected me in a way that I just kind of felt like I needed a big break from everything that had to do with performing, especially for musical theater. And at the same time, I had not felt as passionate about film scoring as I used to. So that dream was kind of a slow fade, and I put more energy into the podcast. I began to think more about how I can be a better teacher, started revisiting how I structured my lessons, how I thought about myself as a teacher. I got some business coaching for the first time ever. And of course, in 2023, I started this podcast again. And also in 2023, I discovered that some of the tutorial videos I have does get a bit of a reach on YouTube. And my plan this year is to grow that YouTube even more. I actually did. When I started this podcast, I did so with a YouTube channel that had 45 subscribers. All I had ever really put on there was just like some of the clips of my film music or, some demos of my music. And then, I started putting stuff from my podcast on here. So all the podcast episodes are here. So up to this point, this episode has been very rambly. I needed to kind of talk through my last few years to get you an idea where I've been. So my 2024 goal was to grow this podcast, to grow my YouTube channel, and to stay full as a teacher and to make the most income I can without filling up the time more than I'm able to do, and also to give each student the best experience that I can. Recently, I took on this idea of what's called a master calendar. Master calendar is this. You have 24 hours in a day. You have 168 in a week. Write down, go ahead and put in, basically take a calendar and schedule everything you think of that you have to do ought to do, want to do, just write it all down on a list. And you start with sleep. You just put sleep in its place. You have to sleep. If you don't leave time for it, if you try to make room for it, you're going to be low on sleep. So it's not to say that you'll successfully sleep for 8 hours a day, or that I will, but I started off with that. Bedtime, time to wake up. It's like all of that's off limits for anything else. Now, all of this with the understanding, this is a master calendar, it's a default calendar. It's, if you have, gigs that come along every now and then, or, something else. Like for me, it's like if I have a podcast interview, I can't schedule that. I don't have one every week. So I know that I'm going to have to make adjustments when I do. But that said, this is it's really a thought experiment more than anything. It's just to kind of get these ideas on paper, because it's going to teach you something, and I'm going to keep on going to tell you about this. But you start off with sleep, and if you say that you really want to shoot for 8 hours as a goal, that leaves you with 16 hours per day. So now you got to think about, when are you eating? And, are you the one cooking the food? How much time do you need to prepare? So you need to allot the time that you need for your meals, because again, you'll squeeze them in an unhealthy way if you don't schedule that. So we start off with that. We might have a burning desire to be a great musician, but you're not going to be much of anything if you're not eating well and you're not sleeping well. So yes, you kind of see where the next thing is. Working out, getting out and taking walks. I don't want to squeeze those in. I want to know where they are. So I write that down. Now I'm not going to keep counting down how many hours are left, but certainly far less than 16 now. Okay, now I've got to put in some work things. Teaching hours are at fixed times. My students have appointments at the same time every week. So I write those times down. But not only that, because I teach some students here at this studio, but I also teach in another city, I have to include commute time. It's important to me, especially at night, that I wind down with reading. So I've got a 30-minute slot for reading before I go to bed. Like some of you, I have a long streak on Duolingo. I want to keep that active. I have to allot time for that. Now, we got all this. We don't have all this space. We have a few hours each day that we can do a few things. I have to put in my time to allot for this podcast. I have to put in time to allot for growing my YouTube channel. I also need to have time to think about social media and other types of marketing. I need to think about maintaining my website, making changes to that. I also have to make time to mow my lawn, to do laundry, to go get groceries, or run other errands. Also, just I want to make sure I have some downtime. I do not want 168 hours of stuff. I want free time in there. So I do all of this on there, and I also, of course, want to practice the piano, and I also want to compose. And, it's probably not a wild guess of how this turned out. What did the calendar reveal to me? It revealed to me that it's hard to fit in all of this. It is hard to make time. So in my estimation, I kind of need 4 to 5 hours per week each for YouTube and podcasting. I feel like I need 4 hours per week for composing. Now, again, piano is not the main thing I do, but it is a big skill that I use quite a bit. So I felt like I needed about 3 hours a week of practicing the piano. And I tweaked these numbers quite a bit, and I tried to get them where I was going. Over the past few years, I've crowded a few things out to make room for these types of things, the YouTube, the podcasting, the teaching. But I really hadn't been making room for composing like I should. And I also really kind of have withdrawn from musical theater. I do, usually most of the work that I do now is recording in my studio tracks that they can use for their performances or their rehearsals. But I haven't as often music directed. But I had a couple of things happen this week. And I don't know, how many of them are going to pan out. But there was someone looking for as a paid project looking for an arranger for their musical, something that I've done a few times. But this is with a different group of people, and actually not even an arranger. They were looking for an orchestrator. And then I had a local theater ask if I would be interested in music directing one of their shows next year. And I've regularly been saying no to that. But this time I kind of paused and I said, actually, yes, I think I do want to do that. And that led me to this big idea, this thing that I could not get out of my head that was in my head this morning. You'll get busy, and if you do this thought experiment that I just said, and actually it's a little bit more than a thought experiment. It is a master calendar now. It is something I'm going to use as a template for quote unquote normal weeks, where I can make sure that I have scheduled time for everything that I want to do, that I need to do. But I had to tweak it a lot because one of the things that I realized I was leaving out is important things like composing and important things like performing, like having time with other people, collaboration. One of the things that the life I chose with podcasting and YouTube being such prominent features is it's lonely. I do it all by myself. I might get my wife, to help me with some artwork or some pictures, but it is very lonely. And as far as teaching, it's 45 minutes per week with a person. And on average, probably about 95% of that time is all business. We have a little bit of small talk, a little bit of chit chat, but we're not hanging out. And so I missed the collaboration. But the other thing I missed was being a musician, being a performer, being a composer, creating music, making music. It's great to teach music. I have the utmost respect for anybody who teaches, especially if you put so much energy into it. I am a teacher, but even if I wasn't, I would have the utmost respect for teachers. And being a podcaster, being a YouTuber, these are these are extensions of teaching. So what I realized was all of my main goals were about teaching. And it's important to me that I always am a teacher, but it's also important that I am also always a creating artist. I need projects for arranging, for composing. I need to be taking time to do performance. Now, here's the big thing. Here's what kind of popped in my head. It's not always lucrative to do it that way in terms of finances. I've actually had years where I stayed so busy with musical theater that I would literally close one show and then start rehearsing another. And I would say all but maybe like 3 or 4 weeks of the year. It was like a full-time job, except I was doing 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it was like a part-time job. And I was making, less income from that than I did maybe even half of what I was making from teaching. So it's easy to look at this and say, if I want to make a living as a musician, I need to teach music. But if you want to make a living as a musician, you really have to have a portfolio if you want it to be financially and artistically satisfying. So teaching is a big thing for me, but it's not the main thing. It's not the thing that drove me to become a musician. I don't need to go out to Los Angeles and become a film composer anymore. My dream is not that specific. I don't even have to compose my own original music. I love orchestrating and arranging other people's music, but I need to be creating or helping others with their creation. I need to be using my compositional skills. I also need to use my conducting skills, use my piano skills. There's some things that I do well, and I can do it while interacting with other people in person. Sometimes it pays. Sometimes it pays well. Sometimes it doesn't pay at all. When you start thinking like a business, one of the things that's likely to happen is that you're going to get out, there's this funny Venn diagram out there. It's like things that people value, things that make money, and it's overlapping. And then there's a little circle off to the side, things I do well, or things that I enjoy doing. In other words, so often, like what we really want to do is not where the marketplace lines up. So I'm going to offer an example that I'm quite familiar with. It doesn't necessarily apply to me, but I know a lot of people it does. A lot of people like to write very cerebral concert music. It's kind of very suitable if you are kind of a full-time professor of music and you're composing on this certain type of music that really only your colleagues want to hear. I'm sorry to actually have to say that out loud, because I do appreciate some of it myself, but most people don't. If you want to be a composer that's writing aesthetically satisfying music to yourself, or even, analytically satisfying music for yourself, there's a chance that you might not have an audience for that. It might not have a very big audience for that. And an even bigger chance that you're not going to make much, if any, income from that. But you could say, okay, well, I'll have a day job that pays the bills, and I would go through my craft in my free time because it's art. It's something that I need as part of my life. Another thing you can do is you create what you think people want. And we do have a slang slur for this. It's called selling out. But when you become a musician who thinks of themselves like a business, you stop saying that term. You stop saying sell out. There's mainstream, or there's marketable, there's commercially appealing music. There's a lot of ways to say it. And so there's two schools of thought on this. It is come up with a way to do your art in a way that can be marketed to make a good income, or do your own thing and have other aspects of your life to support it. And what I want to make today, the point I want to make, is that either of those two are okay. If you really want to use your primary role as a musician, the way you express yourself, either as a composer, as a performer, as a conductor, and it doesn't align with what you are, where you feel the most artistic and intellectual fulfillment, that's okay, because you've studied, you know what you're doing, and you're doing what you've learned. You put it into practice. It's also okay if you want to make sure that your income is covered from other means. Now, even like I do, can have everything to do with music. But maybe you have a job that has nothing to do with music, but it gives you time, at least a little time each day, to work on your art, to work on your musicianship. And so what I really want to say today is, whatever your main thing is, don't ever forget it. If you can work it into a career, that's gravy. That's wonderful. But if you have a burning desire to be a musician of any kind, it's really important that you don't crowd it off of your calendar because you're too busy thinking about all of the other things, that pay the bills. Or you're listening to too many gurus I have probably been one of those gurus on certain episodes. I've probably expressed it in a way that has unintentionally given you this message, and that is that you always have to think like a professional to think like a business, and that if you can't, you should you should find something else and not do your music. Now, I've never said that, but that's the unspoken message that comes from so many people trying to push you to do the attainable but very difficult task of making an entire living off of being a musician. So what I want to challenge you to do, and what I'm really challenging myself to do, is to exercise judgment, exercise balance. There's a thing, I know that if I wanted to, I could once again fill up my whole year with music directing, but then I would get burnt out again, and I would start thinking about, when am I ever going to get some time off in the evenings, just come home and relax and so forth. But there's a fine balance between saying no to everything and being home every evening and being lonely, or, just not using some strengths that I have developed. So use judgment. But what is your main thing? Don't neglect it. Make time for it. And to hell with what anybody else says. If it's not making money for you right now, and it might or might not ever make any or much money, but you owe it to yourself to not let your passion die for what it is you truly love to do. So that's my thing today. And as I hear myself say it, it sounds vague. I've done a lot of podcasts where I've come on with actionable lists. And I guess if I was going to do that this time, my actionable list for you would be to do what I did and create your own master calendar, and do that with a pencil, or do that on a tablet where you can make copies, make version 2, version 3, and start deleting things, and find that right balance for your work, for your health, for your social life, for your mental health, of course, and leave time for your art. Leave time for what it is you want to do just because you want to do it, just because of something that you've become good at doing or something you want to get better at doing. So that's my actionable list for you. Make your own calendar. And if you, like I do, see you don't have the time right now to do it, you start erasing, you start changing your schedule until you have made the time. Okay, that's going to wrap up episode number 79. If you got any value out of this episode, I would really appreciate it if you would share it, whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you're listening as a podcast. Share this in your social media. Share it to a friend. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like sign and make sure you're subscribing. If you'd like to send me any thoughts on this episode, you can do that by sending me a message at davidlanemusic.com. Or if you want me to consider it for future inclusion on a podcast with your own voice, you can send me a voice message at speakpipe.com/musician toolkit. Once again, it's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.